On the fringes of sacred history, where official narratives end and whispers begin, resides an enigmatic and powerful figure. Her name is Lilith. To many, she is just a myth, a specter born from medieval folklore. However, for others, she represents a censored chapter of creation, the answer to a subtle inconsistency hidden within the book of Genesis itself. This is a journey in search of the forbidden story of the first woman. Most of us know the story of Adam and Eve, the primordial couple in the Garden of Eden. Their narrative of creation, temptation, and fall is the bedrock of beliefs that have shaped the world. But what if that wasn't the whole truth? What if Adam's first companion wasn't Eve, but a woman created from the same earth as he, equal in every way? This possibility arises from a close reading of the first chapters of Genesis. Chapter 1 describes God creating humanity, male and female, in his image. Then, Chapter 2 narrates a second creation, where Eve is formed from Adam's rib. This apparent duality has been a fertile ground for theologians and scholars, generating questions that echo through the centuries about a possible first woman. It is in this space of questioning that the name Lilith emerges from the mists of time, not from the canonical Bible, but from ancient texts and mystical traditions, such as the alphabet of Ben Sira. She is presented as this first woman, strong, independent, and who refused to be subjugated, a figure who chose exile over submission, paying a terrible price for her freedom and autonomy. The story of Lilith, therefore, is not just a tale about a rebellious woman. It is an exploration of power, equality, and the narratives we choose to tell and to silence. To understand who she was, we must go back to the beginning of everything, to a paradise that contained not only the seed of life, but also the seed of a conflict that would change the destiny of humanity forever. At the dawn of existence, when the world was new and creation breathed its first innocence, the Garden of Eden flourished in perfect harmony. It was a sanctuary of abundant life, where the divine order was manifest in every leaf and every creature. It was in this idyllic setting that humanity was conceived not once, but twice, according to the legends that dared to survive time. The narrative that places Lilith as the first woman is based on the idea of a simultaneous and equal creation. Unlike Eve, who would come from Adam's rib, Lilith was said to be molded from the same dust. God, breathing the breath of life into both, made them partners, not master and servant. This shared origin is a core of her identity and the source of her unwavering conviction of equality. Imagine the scene. Two human figures, Adam and Lilith, awakening to consciousness amidst the beauty of Eden. They explore the garden together, name the animals, and discover the wonders of creation as equals. There was no hierarchy, only a divinely ordained partnership, a mirror of the balanced duality seen throughout nature. This was the original intention, a plan of perfect coexistence between the two. If you've ever wondered about the stories that aren't the most well-known sacred texts, subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications, because this journey in search of Lilith, the forbidden story of Adam's first woman, will challenge much of what you know. Delving into these tales is to discover new layers of meaning about human nature itself and its complex relationships from the very beginning. However, this initial harmony was destined to be tested. Equality, which for Lilith was an intrinsic and non-negotiable truth, would soon become a point of contention. Paradise, designed to be a place of peace, was about to become the stage for humanity's first battle, a fight not for forbidden fruit, but for the fundamental right to be seen and treated as an equal. The tranquility of Eden was shaken not by a serpent or fruit, but by a profoundly human dispute over power and position. Legend has it that the conflict between Adam and Lilith began in intimacy, but symbolized a much larger issue. Adam, interpreting his primacy as authority, insisted that Lilith should lie beneath him, in a position of physical and symbolic submission. Lilith, aware of her equal origin, vehemently refused. "Why should I lie beneath you?" she reportedly asked. "I also was made from dust, and therefore I am your equal." Her refusal was not an act of frivolous disobedience, but a powerful affirmation of her identity and worth. She saw no reason why one should be considered superior to the other when both were created from the same matter and by the same creator. This impasse reveals the first great challenge faced in paradise. It was not an external temptation, but an internal relationship crisis. Adam saw order as hierarchy, while Lilith saw it as partnership. His insistence on dominating and her refusal to submit created an irreparable fissure in their union, turning the bed of love into the first ideological battlefield in history. The situation escalated quickly. Dialogue was exhausted, replaced by stubbornness and misunderstanding. Adam would not yield in his demand for control, and Lilith would not betray her own nature for a forced peace. She realized that her permanence in Eden was conditioned on her subjugation, a condition her free soul could not accept under any circumstances. The original harmony was irreparably broken. Faced with an unsolvable impasse in Adam's refusal to acknowledge her equality, Lilith made a drastic and unprecedented decision. She realized that to preserve her essence, she could no longer stay in that garden which had become a prison. She needed an act of supreme power, a way to escape the control of Adam and of Eden itself. And this would lead her down a path of unimaginable consequences. In her moment of greatest desperation and determination, Lilith resorted to a power that was guarded as the most sacred of secrets. She uttered the ineffable name of God. In Jewish mystical tradition, knowing and articulating the sacred tetragrammaton conferred immense power, a direct connection to the source of creation. It was an act of supreme audacity, a final resort for one who had nothing left to lose. Upon uttering the sacred name, wings were said to have sprouted from her back, and she ascended into the heavens, leaving behind a shocked Adam in a Garden of Eden that no longer contained her. Her escape was not an act of cowardice, but the most radical declaration of independence. She did not wait to be cast out. She chose to leave. She abandoned paradise, so she would not have to abandon herself. Lilith's flight represents a moment of monumental failure, not necessarily hers, but the ideal of harmony in Eden, the first human union, created to be perfect, disintegrated under the weight of ego and the struggle for power. Lilith's departure left a void, an absence that needed to be explained and, eventually, filled, which would set the stage for the creation of a new woman, Eve. Desolate and alone, Adam prayed to God, lamenting the departure of his companion. He did not ask for reconciliation or understanding, but for her to be forced to return. In response to his plea, the narrative tells that God sent 3 angels, Sinoi, Sansanoi, and Samanjalov, with a mission to find Lilith and convince her or force her to return to the Garden of Eden and to her place beside Adam. The celestial chase had begun. The angels found her on the shores of the Red Sea, a place that would become her new domain, a wild refuge far from the controlled order of Eden. The confrontation that followed would not only be about her return, but about the price of her freedom and the new role she would be forced to assume in the world. The encounter between Lilith and the 3 angels on the shores of the Red Sea was a decisive moment. They delivered the divine ultimatum: return to Adam and Eden or face a terrible consequence. For every day she refused to return, 100 of her children would die. It was a punishment of unimaginable cruelty, designed to break her spirit and force her submission through pain and loss. Despite the devastating threat, Lilith held her ground. She looked at the celestial messengers and reaffirmed her decision. Eden, under Adam's terms, was not a paradise but a gilded cage. She preferred freedom in exile, even if it came with perpetual pain, to a life of servitude in supposed perfection. Her refusal was her final act of defiance against the patriarchal order. Her response sealed her fate. Lilith was cursed to wander the world, transformed from the first woman into a demon of the night, a threat to newborns and women in childbirth. In a twisted revenge of the loss of her own children, her image was rewritten. Her story contorted to serve as a warning against female disobedience. The woman who wanted equality became a monster. This moment of divine and angelic failure to persuade her reveals the depth of her conviction. The punishment did not break her, but solidified her in her new role. She became the antithesis of Eve, who would be created to be submissive and compliant. While Eve would become the mother of all living within the established order, Lilith would become the mother of the renegades, the exiles, those who live on the margins. From this point on, Lilith's journey moves completely away from the divine and delves into the shadows. Her story becomes a tragic example of how narratives are shaped by the victors. What could have been a lesson on the importance of equality was transformed into a cautionary tale about the dangers of rebellion. But by analyzing her character, we find powerful virtues beneath the layers of demonization. Analyzing Lilith's character requires us to look beyond the demonic image imposed upon her. Her main virtue, and also the source of her ruin, was her unwavering conviction. She possessed an absolute clarity about her own worth. Born from the same clay as Adam, she saw herself as his equal in all aspects, and this perception was non-negotiable. This self-awareness is a lesson in dignity. Another prominent virtue in her story is courage. To stand up to Adam, challenge the power structure of Eden, and finally, confront God himself and his angels require extraordinary bravery. She chose exile and condemnation rather than compromise her principles. Her courage was not in physical strength, but in the strength of her will and her refusal to be silenced or diminished. The pursuit of freedom is perhaps her most inspiring characteristic. Lilith is an archetype of the soul that yearns for autonomy. She understood that true freedom is not the absence of hardship, but the ability to make one's own choices, even if those choices lead to a path of suffering and solitude. She paid the highest price for her freedom, making it all the more precious. Her story also highlights the importance of personal integrity. She remained true to herself, even when it meant losing everything: her home, her partner, and her place in the divine order. This refusal to betray herself is a powerful lesson on the importance of living according to one's own values, regardless of external pressure to conform. Lilith teaches us that authenticity has immense power. However, Lilith's narrative is not without its complexities and traits that can be seen as weaknesses. Her inflexibility, though born from strong conviction, also prevented her from finding a middle ground. Her journey forces us to question whether the rigidity of her principles was, at the same time, her greatest strength and her tragic flaw, leading her to an inevitable isolation. The same conviction that defines Lilith's virtues can also be interpreted as her main weakness: inflexibility. Her refusal of any form of compromise, even a symbolic one, closed the door to any possibility of reconciliation with Adam. The pride in her equality may have blinded her to alternative solutions, turning a disagreement into a war wheels with no winners, only losses for both sides. Her decision to utter the ineffable name and flee, though an act of power, can also be seen as an escape from the responsibility of building a relationship. Instead of continuing the difficult work of negotiation and mutual understanding, she chose radical rupture. This impulsiveness, born of desperation, cast her onto a path of loneliness and turned her into a symbol of division, not a union. Furthermore, later legend portrays her as embracing darkness after her expulsion. By becoming a vengeful figure who torments Eve's children, she allows her pain to turn into malice. This transition from victim to tormentor is a tragic weakness, showing how injustice suffered can corrupt even the strongest spirit, perpetuating a cycle of suffering instead of overcoming it. Her story also reveals a certain initial naivety. She believed that the logic of her equality would be self-evident and accepted by all, including Adam and her creator. She did not anticipate the depth of the resistance to her autonomy. This lack of foresight left her unprepared for the consequences of her defiance, resulting in a disproportionate punishment she might not have imagined was possible. By analyzing these weaknesses, we do not demonize her, but humanize her. Lilith becomes a more complex and relatable figure. She shows us that the line between steadfast principles and self-destructive stubbornness is thin. Her journey, with its strengths and flaws, reveals not only her character, but also sheds a complex light on the character of the divinity with whom she came into conflict. Lilith's journey inevitably leads us to question the nature of God as portrayed in this legend. The divine response to the conflict in Eden is revealing. Instead of mediating the conflict and reaffirming the equality of his creations, the divinity seems to take Adam's side. This suggests a God who values hierarchical order and stability over individual equality and justice. The punishment inflicted upon Lilith, the daily death of her children, is particularly brutal and seems disproportionate to her crime of desiring parity. This act reveals a divine character that does not hesitate to use cruelty to enforce obedience. It forces us to confront an uncomfortable theology where submission is demanded and rebellion is punished with unimaginable pain. Painting a grim portrait of divine power, the subsequent creation of Eve from Adam's rib can be seen as a divine course correction. If the first woman, created as an equal, was too independent. The second was deliberately created from a man, and for the man to be a suitable helper. This sequence of events reinforces the idea of a divine plan that, after Lilith's failure, adjusted to ensure a patriarchal structure. However, there is another possible interpretation. Perhaps the story is not about a patriarchal god, but about how human beings themselves, through their narratives and laws, projected their own patriarchal values onto the divine. Lilith may be a scapegoat, a figure created to justify a social order where women are subservient, attributing the structure to a divine decree. Thus, Lilith's relationship with God is a mirror of human tensions. Her story reflects our own struggle to understand the divine. Is it a God who demands blind obedience or one who grants dangerous free will? Lilith's journey offers no easy answers, but it forces us to deeply examine the images of God we construct and the implications they have on our lives and societies. After Lilith's departure and the consolidation of her curse, her figure began a long journey of transformation in the collective imagination. She ceased to be just the first rebellious woman to become the archetype of the feminine shadow. Everything that patriarchal society feared in a woman, independence, hidden wisdom, free sexuality, and untamable power, was projected onto her and demonized. In Mesopotamian mythology, we find similar figures, such as the Lilith of demons, wind spirits believed to seduce men and harm children. Lilith's name and characteristics likely merged with these older legends, cementing her reputation as a nocturnal and dangerous entity. She became the personification of male fears about autonomous and uncontrollable female power. Her association with the night, the moon, and the waters of the Red Sea is also symbolic. These elements represent the unconscious mystery and deep emotions, contrasting with the solar and rational order often associated with the masculine and the patriarchal divine. Lilith became the queen of what was repressed, the ruler of the domains that the daylight consciousness preferred to ignore or fear. Lilith's transformation into a child-stealing demon is perhaps the cruelest of distortions. The woman cursed to lose her own children was turned into a threat to the children of others. This tragic inversion served as a powerful tool of social control, using fear to reinforce the woman's role as a protective mother within the confines of the home, as opposed to the dangerous and free figure. Over the centuries, this demonic image was the only version of Lilith that survived in popular culture. She became a boogeyman tale, a legend to explain infant mortality, and a symbol of everything profane. Her original story of struggle for equality was almost completely buried under layers of fear and misogyny, waiting to be rediscovered by new generations. The creation of Eve is an event that can only be fully understood in the context of Lilith's absence. If Lilith represented independence and rebellion, Eve was designed to be her antithesis, the submissive and compliant companion, formed from Adam's rib. Her very origin tied her to him in a way that Lilith, created from the same dust, never was. Eve is introduced as Adam's helper, a role that implies support and subordination. Her existence was a solution to Adam's loneliness, but also an assurance that the challenge to male authority would not be repeated. The second woman was created to fit into the hierarchy that the first rejected, establishing a new paradigm for gender relations that would echo for millennia in Abrahamic cultures. Despite being the antidote to Lilith, Eve is not a simple figure. She also demonstrates agency and curiosity, especially in the episode of the Tree of Knowledge. However, her transgression is framed differently. While Lilith's rebellion was an act of personal affirmation and pride, Eve's was an act of disobedience born from persuasion and a desire for wisdom, with consequences shared with Adam. This duality of Lilith and Eve is fascinating. What do you think? Do they represent two facets of the female psyche, or were they characters created to define social roles? Leave your opinion in the comments below. We want to know how this dynamic resonates with you and your perception of these figures, so complex and influential in our culture, even if one of them was hidden. In the end, Eve and Lilith function as mirrors of each other. One represents the woman accepted by patriarchal society, the mother of humanity within the order. The other represents the exiled woman, the renegade shadow who lives outside the rules. Together, they form a complete portrait of the feminine, with its longings for connection and belonging, as well as its desire for autonomy and freedom. Although absent from the canonical Bible, Lilith's name and legend were not completely erased. She survives in apocryphal, midrashic, and Kabbalistic texts, preserved by those who dare to look at the margins of orthodoxy. The Alphabet of Ben Sira, a satirical medieval text, is the most explicit source of her story as Adam's first wife, detailing the conflict in her flight from Eden. In the Zohar, the foundational text of Kabbalah, Lilith takes on an even more complex dimension. She is portrayed as a powerful cosmic force, the dark counterpart to Shekinah, the divine feminine presence. She rules the other side, Sitra Akra, and is a figure of immense power, a seductress who represents the forces of chaos and severe judgment, being a feared and respected figure. Her single and controversial mention in the canonical Bible is a point of great debate. In Isaiah 34, verse 14, describing the desolation of Edom, the text mentions that Lilith, translated in some versions as night creature, screech owl, or night monster, will rest there. For many scholars, this is proof that she was a known figure from ancient folklore, a desert demoness. This fragmented textual heritage shows that Lilith never completely disappeared. She remained as an undercurrent, a persistent memory of an alternative to the official narrative. Her story was kept alive in mystical and folkloric circles, where questions of power, sexuality, and the dark feminine could be explored in ways that mainstream theology did not permit or even condemned. The survival of her legend against all odds is a testament to her archetypal power. Stories like that of Lilith, the forbidden story of Adam's first woman, persist because they touch on deep truths about the human condition. They speak of our struggles for identity, our relationship with authority, and the parts of ourselves that are often repressed and exiled. The transformation of Lilith from an egalitarian woman into a night demon was not a historical accident. It was a deliberate process of demonization. This process is a powerful and ancient tool of social control. By turning a figure who challenges the established order into a monster, the dominant authority creates an effective cautionary tale to dissuade others from following the same path of rebellion and questioning. The characterization of Lilith as a dangerous seductress and a child thief directly targeted the sources of female power, sexuality, and motherhood. Her free sexuality was labeled as promiscuous and destructive, while her tragic fate of losing her children was inverted to make her a threat to the motherhood of others. This reinforced a model where female sexuality was only acceptable within marriage and for procreative purposes. This control mechanism was not unique to Lilith. Throughout history, women who held power or knowledge, like healers later called witches, or who simply lived outside social norms, were often demonized. They were accused of witchcraft, heresy, or promiscuity to neutralize their influence and reassert patriarchal control over the community and its power structures. By associating her with darkness, night, and chaos, the patriarchal narrative created a clear dichotomy: the masculine, associated with light, order, and reason, God Adam, and the rebellious feminine, associated with darkness, chaos, and emotion, Lilith. This false equivalence served to justify the suppression of women and marginalize qualities like intuition and autonomy, labeling them as dangerous or even evil. Understanding this process is crucial to reevaluating the figure of Lilith. She forces us to ask, who benefits from telling the story this way? By deconstructing the layers of demonization, we can begin to see the figure behind the monster and the truth behind the myth, a truth that has profound relevance for our contemporary struggles for justice and equality. In the 20th century, with the rise of feminist movements, the figure of Lilith was rescued from the shadows and completely re-signified. The qualities that led to her demonization: independence, refusal to be subjugated, sexual and intellectual autonomy, were exactly the characteristics that transformed her into a powerful feminist icon. She became a symbol of the woman who does not ask for permission to be free. Feminists saw in Lilith's story a mirror of their own struggle. Her refusal to accept an inferior position in Eden echoed women's fight for equal rights in marriage, the workplace, and society. Lilith's story validated the idea that the quest for equality was not a modern aberration, but an ancient yearning present since the beginning of humanity. She became the patroness of marginalized women, of those who were labeled difficult, rebellious, or hysterical for refusing to conform to social expectations. Lilith represents the strength to say no to oppression, even if it means being exiled or misunderstood. Her story offers a model of radical self-affirmation in a world that constantly tries to diminish women's voices. The reclaiming of her sexuality was also a central point, where she was once seen as a demonic seductress. The new interpretation celebrates her as a woman who owned her own body and her own desires, free from shame and male control. She became a symbol of female sexual liberation, of reclaiming pleasure and autonomy over one's own reproductive and affective choices. Thus, the woman who was cursed and cast out of paradise was finally invited into a new pantheon, that of the heroines of liberation. Her story, once a cautionary tale, became a rallying cry, a reminder that narratives can be rewritten and that the monsters of yesterday can become the heroes of tomorrow, inspiring new generations to fight for a more just world. The resurgence of Lilith as a feminist icon has boosted her presence in modern popular culture, where she frequently appears in books, movies, television series, and music. Artists and creators are drawn to her complexity, using her to explore themes of rebellion, female power, sexuality, and the struggle against oppressive systems. She has become a muse for narratives that challenge the status quo. In series like Supernatural or Chilling Adventures of Sabrina, Lilith is often portrayed as a powerful demon, often the first of her kind, with a tragic backstory that connects her to her original rebellion against Adam and God. Although still associated with darkness, these portrayals often give her depth, motivation, and agency that make her a captivating character. In literature, fantasy, and historical fiction, authors have reimagined her story in countless ways. Some portray her as a repressed pagan goddess, others as a revolutionary leader, and some even see her as a tragic figure in search of redemption. These literary works offer a space to explore the nuances of her myth, far from the constraints of ancient religious texts. The Lilith Fair Music Festival, created in the 90s by singer Sarah McLachlan, was a cultural milestone. The name was deliberately chosen to celebrate female power in music and challenge a male-dominated industry. The festival became a symbol of female strength and solidarity, bringing Lilith's name and story to a mainstream audience that might never have known her. This constant presence in pop culture demonstrates that Lilith's story continues to resonate deeply with contemporary audiences. She is no longer just an obscure footnote in ancient texts. She is a living force, an archetype that continues to evolve, reflecting our own anxieties, hopes, and our ongoing search for freedom, identity, and a place in the world. Beyond her role as a feminist icon, Lilith also holds profound psychological meaning, especially in Jungian psychology. She personifies the shadow archetype, that part of our psyche containing the instincts, desires, and personality traits we repress because they are considered unacceptable by our consciousness or by society. She is everything we hide from ourselves. The story of her expulsion from Eden is a perfect metaphor for the process of psychological repression. Just as Lilith was exiled to the fringes of the world, we exile parts of ourselves to the unconscious. However, what is repressed does not disappear. It continues to exert a powerful influence, often in destructive ways. Just as the demonized Lilith haunted humanity, the work of integrating the shadow, according to Carl Jung, is a crucial step towards individuation and psychological wholeness. This means consciously confronting these repressed parts of ourselves, acknowledging them, and integrating them into our personality. Lilith's journey, from demon to icon, reflects this process, bringing to light what was relegated to darkness to reclaim its power and wisdom. For women, integrating the Lilith archetype can mean reconnecting with their righteous anger, their ambition, their autonomous sexuality, and their refusal to be silenced. For men, it can mean confronting and integrating their own dark feminine, recognizing and accepting qualities like vulnerability, intuition, and the ability to challenge rigid power structures, both external and internal. Therefore, Lilith's relevance today transcends theology and politics. She invites us on an inner journey of self-knowledge. She asks us, what parts have you been exiled? What powers have you repressed for fear of judgment? By embracing our own inner Lilith, we can become more complete, authentic, and powerful individuals, living a life that is truly our own. The story of Lilith at its core is a powerful lesson on the fundamental importance of equality and mutual respect in relationships. The original conflict in Eden was not about inherent evil, but about the failure to recognize the intrinsic worth of the other. Adam's insistence on hierarchy and Lilith's refusal to accept it demonstrate how inequality is the seed of discord. Her example teaches us that a peace based on the submission of one party is not true peace, but disguised oppression. True harmony can only flourish in an environment of genuine respect, where all voices are heard and valued. The tragedy of Lilith and Adam is a timeless reminder that relationships, whether personal or social, crumble when power replaces partnership. We can apply this lesson in our lives today by examining our own relationships. Are we seeking to dominate or to collaborate? Are we listening to our partners, friends, and colleagues with the intention of understanding, or just to impose our own will? Lilith's story challenges us to build bridges of empathy instead of walls of pride, seeking a balance where everyone can thrive. Furthermore, her narrative warns us about the dangers of silencing dissenting voices. By expelling and demonizing Lilith, the Order of Eden did not solve the problem. It merely repressed it, creating an antagonistic force that will continue to haunt humanity. This shows us that ignoring demands for justice and equality does not make them disappear. On the contrary, it strengthens them in the shadows. Learning from Lilith's example today means actively fighting for more just and egalitarian structures in our families, communities, and the world. It means recognizing that society's strength lies not in imposing uniformity, but in its ability to embrace diversity and ensure that every individual, regardless of their gender or origin, is treated with the dignity they deserve. The story of Lilith is perhaps the most striking example of the danger of a single narrative. For centuries, the creation story focused exclusively on Adam and Eve, presenting a singular model of relationships and gender roles. The exclusion of Lilith was not just the omission of character. It was the erasure of an alternative perspective, of a model of femininity based on equality and autonomy. The Nigerian writer Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie talks about how single stories create stereotypes, and the problem with stereotypes is not that they are untrue, but that they are incomplete. The single story of Eve is the only first woman made female submission the divine norm, whereas a complete story, including Lilith, would reveal a debate about equality from the very beginning of time. When only one version of the story is told, it becomes the only truth, and the power to define that truth is immense. To control the narrative is to control memory, identity, and possibilities. The suppression of Lilith's story served to reinforce a specific social order, making it seem natural and inevitable, when in fact it was a deliberate choice with deep and lasting consequences. Learning from Lilith today teaches us to be skeptical of single narratives and to actively seek out the stories that have been marginalized, silenced, or forgotten. We must ask, whose story is this? Who benefits from it? And most importantly, which voices are missing? This critical curiosity is essential for a more complete and just understanding of the world and our past. The journey to rediscover Lilith, the forbidden story of Adam's first woman, is therefore an act of resistance against oversimplification. It is an effort to reclaim complexity, to honor the multiple truths of human experience, and to ensure that stories of rebellion and courage like hers are not lost forever in the sands of time. Lilith's story challenges us to rethink our own quest for spiritual truth. She shows us that spirituality need not be synonymous with passive acceptance of dogma. On the contrary, it can be a path of active questioning, of challenging established interpretations, and of seeking a more personal and authentic connection with the divine, however we conceive it. Her story suggests that sometimes the most sacred act we can commit is to say no to an authority, even a divine one, when it conflicts with our deepest conscience. Lilith's spiritual journey was not towards blind obedience, but towards personal integrity. She teaches us that true faith may require the courage to walk a lonely path, far from the comfort of conformity. This is not a call to atheism, but to a more mature and robust faith. A faith that does not fear difficult questions, that is not shaken by contradictions, and that is willing to delve into texts and traditions beyond the surface. Lilith's story invites us to be theologians of our own lives, to interpret sacred stories in ways that empower us and promote justice. Many people today feel alienated from traditional religious institutions precisely because these institutions sometimes demand the kind of submission that Lilith rejected. Her figure offers an alternative model of spirituality, one that is wild, free, and found in direct experience, not just in inherited doctrines. She represents the search for God in the desert of exile, not in the garden of orthodoxy. Therefore, to learn from Lilith's example is to embark on our own journey of discernment. It is to have the courage to question, to explore the margins, and to build a framework of belief that resonates with our inner truth. It is to understand that sometimes the path to the sacred is not to the front door of the temple, but through a daring escape into the freedom of the unknown. So, what do we do with these two stories, that of Lilith and that of Eve? Are we forced to choose one over the other? Perhaps the deepest lesson is the need for reconciliation. Not a reconciliation between the characters, but a reconciliation of the narratives within ourselves and our culture. Both stories, that of partnership and that rebellion, have something valuable to teach us. Eve's story tells us about companionship, about creating bonds, and about the shared human journey through vulnerability and interdependence. She is the mother of humanity, the archetype of connection and continuity. Her story, with its own transgression and consequences, is fundamental to understanding the human condition of fallibility and the search for redemption within a community. On the other hand, Lilith's story tells us about the importance of individuality, autonomy, and the courage to stand up for one's principles. She is the archetype of self-sufficiency and personal integrity. Her journey reminds us that before we can be good partners to others, we must be true to ourselves, and that personal dignity should never be the price of belonging. Instead of seeing them as opposites, we can see them as two halves of a whole. A healthy society and a healthy individual needs both Eve's capacity for connection and Lilith's strength of self-affirmation. We need to learn to build communities of mutual support, but also to cultivate the inner strength to stand firm in our convictions when necessary. Reconciling these stories means creating a world where women and all individuals do not have to choose between being loved and being free, between belonging and being themselves. It means honoring both the need for community and the imperative of autonomy, recognizing that true strength lies in the dynamic balance between these two fundamental truths of our existence. In the end, Lilith's legacy is complex and multifaceted. She is the shadow in the garden, the unanswered question in the sacred text, the demon of the night, and the feminist icon. Her journey from Eden to exile and from folklore to pop culture is a testament to the enduring power of stories that refuse to die. She is the personification of narrative resilience. Her story teaches us that the most important figures are not always those celebrated on altars, but sometimes those who are exiled in the desert. It is these marginal figures who often carry the most uncomfortable and necessary truths for our growth. They force us to confront the injustices of our systems and the contradictions in our beliefs. Lilith, the forbidden story of Adam's first woman, is more than an ancient myth. It is a lens through which we can examine our present. She challenges us to question the hierarchies we accept as natural, to reevaluate the roles assigned to us, and have the courage to rewrite the narratives that no longer serve us, both on a personal and collective level. Lilith's legacy is not one of destruction, as her detractors would have us believe, but a profound and uncompromising affirmation of life and freedom. She reminds us that each of us carries the spark of creation, and with it, the inalienable right to exist in fullness and equality. Her voice, once silenced, now echoes for all who seek the truth. If this deep analysis has opened your mind to new perspectives, share this video with someone who also needs to know the story. Don't forget to leave a like to support our work of exploring the deepest and most challenging narratives in human history. The story of Lilith shows us that even in the shadows, the light of truth can eventually find a way to shine.